lost in the antiseptic wash, hung on a rack behind the door. Myrna stripped off the makeshift she was wearing and put on one of the uniforms. She found boots under the desk. When she was dressed, she stood admiring herself in the polished surface of the metal door. She was a handsome woman, and she was very conscious of that. Her face was tanned by the mist-filtered sunlight of Rythar. Her lips were red and sensuous. Her long, platinum-colored hair fell to her shoulders. She compared herself to the small, hard-faced female she had seen in the supply room. Was that a typical Earthwoman? Myrna's lips curled in a scornful smile. Let the gods come down to Rythar, then, and discover what a real female was like in the lush green Rytharian paradise. Myrna went to the desk and glanced at the typed reports. They had been written by a man who signed himself Commander-in-Charge, Guardian Wheel, and they were addressed to the Congress of the World Government. One typed document was a supply inventory. A second, still unfinished, was a budget report. "You won't show a profit next time," Myrna thought vindictively, "when we stop sending you the sacrifice ore." Another report dealt with Rythar, and Myrna read it with more interest. One paragraph caught her attention. "We have asked for soil samples to be taken from an area covering 10,000 miles. Our chemical analysis has been thorough, and we find nothing that could be remotely harmful to human life. Atmospheric samples produce the same negative results. On the other hand, we have direct evidence that no animal life has ever evolved on Rythar. The life cycle is exclusively botanical." The soil samples, Myrna realized, would be the vials of earth which the Earth God had requested so often. Were the Earthmen planning to move their hospital down to Rythar? That idea disturbed her. Myrna did not want her garden world cluttered up with a lot of sick old men discarded by Earth. She turned to the second page of the report. The original colony survived for a year. The sickness in the old village developed only after the first harvest of Rytharian grown food. It is more and more evident that the botanical cycle of Rythar must be examined before we find the answer. To do that adequately, we shall have to send survey teams to the surface. That requires much larger appropriations for research than we have had in the past. The metal immunization suits, which must, of course, be destroyed after each expedition. And what, may I ask, is the meaning of this? Myrna dropped the report and swung toward the door. She saw a woman standing there, another hard-faced Earthwoman, with a starched white cap perched on her graying hair. "I must have come to the wrong room," Myrna said in a small voice. "Indeed. Everyone knows this is command headquarters. Who are you?" The woman put her hand on Myrna's arm, and the fingers bit through the uniform into Myrna's flesh. Myrna pulled away, drawing her shoulders back proudly. Why should she feel afraid? She stood a head taller than this dried-up stranger. She knew the Earthwoman's strength would be no match for hers. "My name is Myrna Brill," she said quietly. "I came up in a god car from Rythar." "Rythar!" The woman's mouth fell open. She whispered the word as if it were profanity. Suddenly she turned and ran down the rim corridor, screaming in terror. "She's afraid of me," Myrna thought, and that made no sense at all. Myrna knew she had to get back to the god car quickly. Since the Earthmen had built up the taboos in order to get their sacrifice ores from Rythar, they would do everything they could to prevent her return. She ran toward an intersecting spoke corridor. An alarm bell began to clang, and the sound vibrated against the metal walls. An armed man sprang from a side room and fired his weapon at Myrna. The discharge burned a deep groove in the wall. So they would even kill her, these men who pretended to be gods. Before the man could fire again, Myrna swung down a side corridor, and at once the sensation of weightlessness overtook her. She could not move quickly. She saw the armed man at the mouth of the corridor. Frantically, she pushed open the door of a room, which was crowded with consoles of transmission machines. 3 men were seated in front of the speakers. They jumped and came toward her, clumsily fighting the weightlessness. Myrna caught at the door jamb and swung herself toward the ceiling. At the same time, the armed man fired. The discharge missed her and washed against the transmission machinery. Blue fire exploded from the room. The three men screamed in agony. Concussion threw Myrna helplessly toward the rim again, and the guardian wheel was plunged into darkness. Myrna's head swam. Her shoulders seethed with pain where she had banged into the wall. She tried to creep toward the circular room, but she had lost her sense of direction, and she found herself back on the rim. The clanging bell had stopped when the lights went out, but Myrna heard the panic of frightened voices. Far away, someone was screaming. Running feet clattered toward her. Myrna flattened herself against the outer wall. An indistinct body of men shot past her. "From Rythar," one of them was saying. "A woman from Rythar. And we've blasted the communication center. We've no way of sending the warning back to Earth." They were gone. Myrna moved back into the spoke corridor. She felt her way silently toward the circular hub room and the god car. Suddenly, very close, she heard voices which she recognized. The man and the woman who had been talking in the supply room. "You're still all right, Dick," the woman said. "She hasn't been here long enough to—" "We don't know that. We don't know how it spreads or how quickly. We can't take the chance." Then we've no choice." Her voice was a small whisper, choked with terror. "None. These have been standing emergency orders for 20 years. We always faced the possibility that one of them would escape. If we'd been allowed to use a different policy of education, but the politicians wouldn't permit that. The wheel has to be destroyed, and we must die with it." "Couldn't we wait and make sure?" "It works too fast. None of us would be able to do the job afterward." The voices moved away. Myrna floated toward the hub room. She found the airlock and pulled herself into the god car. The metal lock hissed closed and light came on. Then she knew she had made a mistake. This ship was not the one she had used when she came up from Rythar. The tiny cabin was fitted with a sleeping lounge, a food cabinet, and a file of reading films. Above the lounge, a mica viewplate gave her a broad view of the sky. Myrna remembered that the man in the supply room had said he was waiting for an auto pickup. He was on his way back to Earth. Myrna had taken his ship instead of her own. In panic, she tried to open the door again, but she found no way to do it. Machinery beneath her feet began to hum. She felt a slight lurch as the pickup left the hub of the Guardian wheel. It swung in a wide arc. Through the viewplate she saw the enormous wheel growing small behind her, silhouetted against the mist of Rythar. Suddenly the wheel glowed red with a soundless explosion. Its flaming fragments died in the void. Myrna dropped weakly on the lounge. Nausea spun through her mind. The man had said they would destroy themselves. Because Myrna had come aboard? But why were they afraid of her? What possible harm could she do to them? Myrna had left Rythar to discover the truth, and the truth was insanity. Was truth always like this, a bitter disillusionment, an empty horror? She had something else to say to the people of Rythar now. Not that the gods were men, but that men were mad. Believe in the taboos, send up the sacrificial ores. It was a small price to pay to keep that madness away from Rythar. And Myrna knew she could not go back. With the wheel gone, she could never return to Rythar. The auto pickup was carrying her inexorably toward Earth. The scream of the machinery slowly turned shrill, hammering against her eardrums. The stars visible in the viewplate blurred and winked out. Myrna felt a twist of vertigo as the shuttle shifted from conventional speed into a time warp. And then the sound was gone. The ship was floating in an impenetrable blackness. Myrna had no idea how much time passed subjectively. When she became hungry, she took food from the cabinet. She slept when she was tired. To pass the time, she turned the reading films